You always see phone companies advertising these insane camera features: shoot in 8K, record in professional log formats, cinematic blurred this, AI powered that. And while the photography side has gotten surprisingly good, especially on those Chinese phones, the video side has always felt like a marketing fluff a lot of the times. At least on Android. But what if I told you that the Android phone in your hand right now can shoot 10-bit actual RAW video? What if I told you it could unlock higher frame rates, recording professional formats like AllexB, for example, to somewhat match a high-end camera, or just straight up shoot video that looks like this, with zero color grading? All of the footage you've seen so far from my trip to Japan was shot on this $200 phone, the CMF Phone 1. Meet MotionCam. In my opinion, one of the most underrated and powerful apps on the entire Android platform. It's so good that even companies like Samsung and Google have reportedly used it for their own commercials. You just never hear about it unless you're digging through behind-the-scenes footage. So what's the secret sauce that makes all of this possible? It all comes down to something called Camera2 API. You can think of it as a special key that unlocks the raw power of your phone's camera hardware. The great news is that most modern Android phones already have this properly implemented, which is what allows an app like MotionCam to exist in the first place. You can also easily check with the free version of the MotionCam app to see if your phone is properly supported. For example, the CMF Phone 2 Pro has 3 lenses on the back, but nothing only implemented Camera2 API on the main 1x lens. And while it is possible to enable full camera support with root access, that's a journey only for the nerdiest among us. Once you open the app, I'll be honest, the interface isn't the friendliest at first glance, but once you actually spend some time with it, it's not so bad. You will realize that everything is laid out logically. So I want to focus on 2 modes here, RAW video and direct log. You can also shoot raw photos, but since most stock camera apps already do that pretty well and with a cleaner UI, you're probably better off sticking with what you know if your phone does support it. Just be aware that some brands like Samsung has been known to apply processing even to their raw photos. MotionCam actually gives you the completely unprocessed look. So starting with raw video, this is the pure untouched data straight from your phone's camera sensor. Every single frame here is saved as a DNG file, essentially saving a raw photo for every single frame. This basically means that you get absolutely the best quality and the most control possible from your phone. The trade-offs? Well, first of all, the file sizes are absolutely massive. We're talking gigabytes for just a few seconds of footage. And second, while you can record directly to an external SSD to speed things up, at least for the phones that have a high-speed USB-C port, the workflow is still quite intense with further processing the footage. And look, while the fact that this is even possible on your phone is insane, I know this level of control is probably overkill for most people. And that's where direct log mode comes in. This is the mode that I use like 99% of the time. It works by capturing the same raw data, but applying your chosen look or profile on the fly, and then saving it into a much more manageable compressed format like HEVC or even ProRes if you want. One thing to keep in mind though, the more processing you ask it to do, the more GPU horsepower you need to have. On this CMF phone, I had to dial down a few settings to get a stable 30 or 24 FPS, depending on which settings I like to shoot with. Generally, Snapdragon phones tend to have better performance compared to Exynos or Tensor, for example, but yeah, your mileage can vary. As for my actual settings, well, I like tweaking those depending on the scenarios, but if I would have to nail it down to like some specific settings, there would be 2 options. If I want to match my Sony mirrorless camera, I obviously choose the Sony S-Log3 profile. And I also like playing around with the gain and tone map settings to get the exposure just right. Now, a weird quirk is the fact that the live preview, which you'll be seeing when you're recording, isn't actually how the final footage is going to end up looking like. You have to press this little button here to see the actual preview of your footage. Yeah, it's a bit annoying you can't see the final look in real time, but they are working on a GPU accelerated preview, so fingers crossed it comes out soon. But what if you want gray looking footage without tweaking absolutely anything? Pretty simple. Set the color space to sRGB and the transfer function to BT Rec 709. And that's pretty much it. You get a natural looking image out of the box without that digital sharpening that most manufacturers tend to do. For more stylistic shots, I also tend to use a custom-baked LUT directly into the footage, something which you can easily do with the app. And it's honestly amazing to have footage that looks exactly how I want the second I hit stop. I've bundled the presets which I use often in a pack. If you're interested and you liked how this footage looked like, you'll find a link to it in the description. Now there's one thing you should keep in mind about stabilization. If your phone relies only on electronic image stabilization, sadly you won't find support for it here. So the footage will end up looking quite shaky. I believe MotionCam would need to develop custom algorithms for every single phone and every single lens and sensor combination, which is just not realistic. Now you can save gyro data and use an app called GyroFlow to stabilize the footage, but I personally find that workflow way too tedious. The easiest solution that I find myself using? Well, obviously if you're shooting footage with the purpose of adding them later into an NLE like DaVinci Resolve for example, then you can stabilize it there. But actually, there's an even better way to do it, directly on your phone. The stabilizer in the Google Photos app is actually very underrated. It's extremely good, and from all of the tests that I've done so far, it even outperforms the one in DaVinci Resolve for me. So where does this leave the iPhone? Well, let's be real. From a pure usability standpoint, Apple's implementation is just way easier to use. Getting a consistent gray-looking footage between different lenses and even different iPhones is usually pretty easy. However, even Apple Log still has one very annoying issue. And that's the fact that if you use a third-party camera app like the Blackmagic one, for example, and you like using manual exposure controls instead of the automatic one, you just straight up lose quite a bit of dynamic range. This has been broken for so long, there's no real excuse for this, Apple should just straight up fix it. But with MotionCam, what you trade in user-friendliness, you gain in raw power. Dare I say, you can get footage that looks objectively better purely because you're starting with an actual raw file. Even compared to ProRes RAW on the new 17 Pro, you have more data, more flexibility, and a higher ceiling for quality if you're willing to put in the work. Especially if you use an Android device like the Pixel 10 Pro, which supports DCG. Speaking of that, and I promise I won't go full geek mode here, DCG stands for Dual Conversion Gain. In simple terms, the sensor can capture two ISO values at the same time in a single exposure. That means you get more information from both the highlights and the shadows. So in turn, you get a wider dynamic range and also a big reduction in noise. It's a win-win in basically every way. The downside is the fact that, as of right now, out of the box, only the Pixel 10 Pro supports this. Honestly, this is something that every Android manufacturer should be implementing from now on, and while technically the support could be added through a software update, since pretty much all the phones nowadays do support it, yeah, I just wouldn't get my hopes up for that. I also want to briefly say that while there are Android manufacturers implementing those log recording formats natively in the stock camera app, most of the time, honestly, they're not that great, at least none that I personally tried. Take Samsung Log for instance, the second most supported phone log format after Apple Log. While the stock camera app definitely shines in aspects like ease of use, most of the time their processing pipeline is still the same typical heavily denoised, over-sharpened look. And sometimes even weird pixel binning, which makes the footage look, well, not the best. Even after a proper Rec 709 conversion, the footage is nowhere near the same quality as you can get with MotionCam. Look, I like having options. Every creative professional wants more tools and easy access without restrictions. At the same time though, I kind of get it. If you're just shooting videos of your dog, you just want to point and shoot, and that's perfectly fine. But still, MotionCam deserves way more attention than it currently has, and I wanted to showcase that the Android phone you already own is probably capable of far more than you think.